Martian Timeslip by Philip K. Dick?
I have not.
No, have only read excerpts.
Did you read excerpts in the context of psychology and its take on autism?
Yes.
Philip K. Dick's interpretation of autism is that it's, in the story, someone trying to treat an autistic kid, and his theory is that they're living in an alternate timeline that moves temporally differently. And so that's why a lot of aspects of autism, like your ability to balance thinking about the future and the past and the present at the same time, it's thrown off. There's also neuroscience research into autism. A lot of the inability to read social cues comes from your timing circuits are not entirely right. That's why people with autism talk in strange cadences, you might have noticed. It's an issue with your motor timing and your ability to interpret motor timing. It also factors into music in your ability to process musical time. And so there's studies of autistic people is they usually have no problem relative to the population identifying pitch or identifying intervals, but rhythmic sense is thrown off.
Interesting. Would that be the primary factor or one of other primary factors of what considers autistic?
Again, the label autism, it's a statistical aggregate of different things.
Sure,
and so this is just one of the elements that's statistically common in
I
people who
get
get
you.
that label.
Interesting.
Why is Alli holding Ice Spice?
That thing makes me so scared.
Ice Spice?
It has a soul.
I'm going to go on my rant. I don't like the terms neurodivergent or neurotypical. I don't have a problem when people use them. I know what the person's trying to communicate. I'm just picky about words, and it's a very inaccurate way of describing cognition and behavior, I think. Because neurotypical isn't some essential state of being that people diverge from. What counts as neurotypical is defined by how society works, which is kind of arbitrary, historically contingent. And the DSM's cool and all, but it's just a constellation of personality traits. These disorders speak to similarities between people, but it doesn't address the difference, which is why I appreciate the move to talking about like the autism spectrum, even better, the ADHD spectrum. I don't want a label, I want a map of a terrain.
I'm just on the page of can't pretend something is not normal if it is, at this point, normal.
It is definitely pretty disingenuous, especially the way that people use neurodivergent and neurotypical now, where neurodivergent doesn't necessarily mean that you're autistic. It just means that you are not typical, but that assumes that anybody knows what typical means and that neurotypical people, in quotations, aren't masking. That doesn't make any sense. I think what we know more of now than we've ever known before is how little we know about the subject. Everybody's, I guess, divergent in a different way, right? But there's people that are autistic and then there's people who aren't autistic, right? But that's not necessarily the only distinction between a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person.
Mm-hmm. And it literally just is what's beneficial to society at the point, which honestly at this point, being more on the spectrum is more beneficial to society due to a lot of the jobs that are in place.
Yeah, it's also about where you're at, what sort of opportunities you have. If you're stuck in a lower social class and your way up is by working 9 to 5, then people with ADHD are going to get diagnosed and it's going to be considered a disorder, versus at higher levels when being able to focus on a lot of tasks is advantageous in corporate positions. Those are the people who don't get diagnosed because it's normal, it's neurotypical for their position.
Well, I was going to say, even in like the autism side, I feel a lot of people are just getting very fixated on symptoms of autism. And I know a lot of people who like to throw the label on it, but it's like, no, you have symptoms of it. You don't necessarily have that disorder, because ADHD shares a lot of symptoms of autism in the same way, back and forth. It's just what's the root cause is what generally becomes the distinction between those two. And so, yeah, I have autistic traits, but I wouldn't count myself as that. I just space out in different ways.
Exactly. And I mean, the fact that the autism diagnosis is heavily gendered, male autism and female autism are considered different things. It speaks to how it's not, like, I don't find autism a very useful word because there's so many facets. It manifests in everyone differently. I mean, there used to be the distinction between autism and Asperger's, and we moved to a spectrum because there's all sorts of dimensions to it. There's the dimension of attention and focus, which also ties in with ADHD. There's a dimension of sociability, and it seems like a lot of different things that just intersect. And we picked one intersection, and we're slowly expanding that intersection. But as it expands, the question is, how do we make this useful to describe how humans think, how humans act?
And there's also a lot of distinctions, lack of being able to pick up on social cues, lack of this that are often associated with autism. That can be a learned thing. If you live in the woods your entire life, yeah, you're not going to know social cues.
I mean, self-awareness is another dimension here. How do you categorize the difference between somebody who doesn't know social cues and don't know they don't know social cues versus someone who doesn't know social cues, but they're aware of it? Because how that affects their cognition and how it affects their behavior is a radical difference between the two.
In a world where we can only assess somebody's brains based off of what they self-report, it's difficult to really be able to clearly identify what's an actual abnormality in your neuroanatomy versus what's just nurture.
That's why I like the hippie mindset about just learn about somebody and get to know, then work out your opinion on them, and then ask them their deep opinion, then cross-analyze it, and then come to your own conclusion. It's kind of like the whole basis of there's Kyles in the world or there's Karens in the world. We have these distinctions on people based on just their kind of name personalities. These aren't personality disorders we've actually established, but they're just helpful. You can say, oh yeah, this dude's a little bit sometimes this.
Yeah. Well, it's not like putting a person in a box. It's
it's a characteristic.
It's opening up these boxes and taking out what makes up this person. These are common traits, and you can find this here, here, and here. It's not about putting them in there. It's about finding out what you need to understand this person, not to understand all the boxes we're making for people, because the people are important, It's all the same. It's all the same thing. It's just brain stuff. It's just brain stuff.
If we're a video game, you're just choosing your stats. That's all this is. It's a good baseline to know what your stats generally are. It's just the terminology I feel starts to get problematic when people then are it's exactly the same to me as saying, oh, I'm a Sagittarius, so that's just why I'm like that. Dude, you still need to work on yourself. Work out your problems. Don't just say I'm an Aries. That's why I'm so heated.
I'm a Copernicus.
Sit in your corner and draw.
That's the first thing I've said in 20 minutes. Zach.
I know. Let's keep it out.
I guess to play a little bit of devil's advocate, this is definitely a really weird grandfathering phase that we're in, especially in the world of moving out of the industrial rut that we've kind of been stuck in for so long, where everybody was ableist and everybody was sort of expected to learn in the same way, do everything the same way. We're building factory workers, even just with the fucking bell system in a high school, right? And so I think nowadays we're seeing that these people who are just geniuses, super smart people that changed the world, yeah, they were also fucking autistic. And so I think the fact that we're, sure, I guess being a bit liberal with the usage of it, I think it is in good faith, really, in the long run. I think eventually it will sort of settle out. But I think that it's important to acknowledge this diverseness between people.
It helps to remember that DSM, it's statistical aggregates of personality traits. There's not an autism gene. There's not a certain shape of a certain brain region that makes you autistic. It's a collection of different functions dispersed all across your neuroanatomy that we recognize happens frequently enough that we can give it a name. Calling people in history autistic, that's like the debate over did King Tut die of tuberculosis? I mean, it's weird, but it also attests to the point we're at in history where most people are on the autism spectrum. And it's not because of self-diagnosis, and it's not because of atrazine in the vaccines. It's because it's an information society. Humans were not designed to function with this level of information flowing constantly. And people are evolving to keep up. We're developing coping mechanisms to deal with the streams of information. It's autism, ADHD.
We have to stimulate our crow brain much more.
True. Get shiny object.
And so we're starting to realize a potential of the human brain that has been mostly dormant, except in the people who surround themselves in information, the polymaths of old. They put themselves in this kind of situation. But now everybody's forced into it.
Everybody's a little bit tismy, right? But
Yep.
there's still that weird adverse reaction that you get from a boomer if you work at a coffee shop and you tell that super cool regular, like, yeah, I got a touch of the tism. And then they go, you what? But you still function. You're not looking at me cross-eyed.
Too many people have seen the movie Rain Man.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's still people that think that there's a very bold distinction between somebody that's neurotypical versus somebody that's autistic. A lot of people still don't acknowledge it as a spectrum of different personalities and different ways of coping with stimuli, right? We're adjusting to this much knowledge being available, but also sort of grandfathering ourselves out of a way bolder line of separation.
I'm just full on team. No one's typical. We just don't know what the different things fully are. And the people who used to be the old version of typical are what we count as that, but they're a vast minority nowadays. I don't think I've interacted with a single person that I'm like, yeah, you're just a normal person. Every one of them, I'm like, now I can see your slight, like, weird focuses or obsessions.
Still got Autism Speaks on some eugenics bullshit.
The other weird question is, everyone's got degrees of these personality traits and clusters of personality traits that cause problems interacting in the real world. And then for institutions, there's an interest in drawing a line of, okay, who needs sustained support in their lives? So there are people who are like profoundly autistic, who it's not like they're going to use their autism superpowers to learn social abilities on their own. So to some extent, there's an imperative to draw another boundary. Who needs what kind of support, even separate from recognition of people deal with things in different ways. Like, it's good that we're starting to recognize that, yeah, lots of people have trouble focusing. You can't expect to sit someone at a desk 9 to 5 and them to get work done effectively.
Yeah, you can expect people to sit at a podcast table and just like talk with each other for.
That's why I give these kids a little drawing, piece of paper.
I love
pencils.
the Applebee's kids meal.
Catch me at your local elementary school flipping LSD, but it's time for an intermission.
Good segue.
Thanks. Made it myself.
Did anyone have any final thoughts, or go get some more drinks?
I don't think.
Mental illness is a weird mix of art and science, which is why it's something we may never find out.
Not while we're too mentally ill.